All wings report in. Austin standing by.
Mike, standing by.
Austin, standing by.
The Rogue 3 podcast is locked on target. Whether it's movies, shows, books, comics, or more, we're going to be coming to you from a galaxy far, far away to celebrate all things Star Wars.
All right, guys. Well, welcome to the podcast. We are the Rogue 3 podcast, and we are jumping in to talk about some of our favorite pieces of each of the Star Wars movies. You know, we're all very firm believers that all Star Wars is good Star Wars, and every Star Wars movie has redeeming qualities to it. Even the movie that you cannot stand has something good about it, whether it's the music, a scene, a character, a fun piece of dialogue. It's got something fun in it. What are your all's thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I have never walked away from a Star Wars movie saying, that was crap or it was just not what I wanted or anything like that. I've always walked away saying, hey, I liked this part of it, or this was really cool, or this added to the overall universe. This made something more real, or it made it more fleshed out, or added to the overall story. And that's true for every bit of Star Wars, whether it's comics or TV shows or any book or anything like that. It always just adds more to the universe. And so I always look forward to that rather than expect to be disappointed. I expect to be enthralled.
Well, and even the things that we don't naturally think is our favorite, not everything's going to be to your cup of tea. There's still going to be things in it that you can enjoy. So even the parts of even the movies or TV shows and things that haven't been like my number one, there's still parts of it that I love. And I think that's why we enjoy it all so much.
And I really want to emphasize that this doesn't mean that we can't offer criticism to Star Wars. This just means that we enjoy looking at the parts of it that we love. It's more fun to spend time liking something than to spend a lot of time not liking something. And this podcast is focused more on the good vibes, the fun feelings, and our favorite things of Star Wars, rather than focusing so much on the parts of Star Wars that we don't enjoy as much. But criticism of Star Wars is appropriate. We're not saying that it's not.
To a point, as soon as it crosses over into attacking actors or writers or directors or anything like that as personal enemies to you or something like that, that's where it steps over a line. It goes too far. And so if we ever talk about criticism, we'll always keep that in mind of we're talking about this story, this overall thing, not attacking an individual person and saying they ruined my childhood.
Because they absolutely did. It's a movie, guys. Like, come on.
And so we thought today that we would go through all of the live action theatrical films and talk about each of us highlight one of our favorite individual aspects of it. So with this, we're trying to go be specific, not broad, and just highlight some of the things that we think make all of these movies unique and special.
I like how you specified the live action theatrical releases. We will not be covering the Clone Wars in this particular episode. When, I imagine that eventually we may look at the Clone Wars. When we do look at that, I think it's better suited to be included with the actual show than to be included with the rest of the live action movies.
Or it just deserves its own episode altogether.
Or there's own episode. It is a very interesting movie.
Yes.
We love very much.
Yes.
Before we dive into, we're going to do this in a chronological timeline order. So in universe timeline order. So we'll start with the prequel movies, but I wanted to ask you guys both, how many times do you think you've watched all of these movies? Could you put a number on how many times you've watched each of them?
I mean, for the original 6 in particular, it's got to be like dozens and dozens of times, because when I was little, my brother and I we were in the car a lot as kids, and we would watch those movies just on repeat over and over again for several years. And then just as I've gotten older, especially now with Disney Plus making it so easy, it's very easy for me to just throw one on and have it playing in the background. So I'm sure those original 6 I've seen a bunch. I mean, even the newer ones, I probably watched Force Awakens probably close to 20 times. Rogue One has been a bunch too, and then the others I've watched probably close to 10.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah.
Mine's a little similar, a little different. Original six I've seen so many times. Our big movie that we watched was Attack of the Clones. We watched that on VHS over and over and over and over again. Um, as far as the newer ones, I've seen Force Awakens a good amount of times. I've actually only seen Solo twice. So I
Well,
definitely need to beef up my knowledge on Solo a little bit. Um, the other sequel movies, probably 10 times. Probably 10 times.
Okay. I'm right along with you guys where the first six, the originals and the prequels is dozens of times at least. As I know I said in our first episode that Phantom Menace is probably the one that I've watched the most, and that's got to be at least 50 times. And even so I've traveled around the country a lot for my job, and I would just have them on like as just audio, just listening to the movies, and I could picture it in my head and go along with it to that extent. The sequels, the newer ones, yeah, it's not as often, but I think I've watched each of those at least 5 times. So at least once a year for Rise of Skywalker. And then same with the other sequels, Solo, those ones is between 5 and 10 maybe.
We tend
well,
to do
those
about
are
a
also
rewatch a
fresh
year.
movies, so
I was going to
Right.
say, there's
Yeah.
been so much time with the six, especially since we were kids when we were watching all of those so much. We had so much free time to watch over and over and
Yeah.
over again.
And there's also
Not as much anymore.
so much more outside of the movies now to watch. And we have so many live action shows. We have so many more cartoon animated shows to watch and all of that stuff that it takes up an equal amount. I've watched Mandalorian probably 3 or 4 or 5 times through, and that's worth like 2 or 3 movies at least because it's 8 episodes a season and they're each 45 minutes long.
well, and when we were kids and the prequels were coming out, you had one movie and you got like obsessed about that for 3 years.
Yeah.
Or something else would come out. Now it's like you have like 3 months until something new comes out. So
Yeah.
No, so much Star Wars, so little time.
Yeah.
Well, shall we get started?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. All right. So we are going to start with Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. We're going to be breaking down different pieces of this. We might mention things like acting, music, specific characters we like, world building, sound design, special effects, the screenplay or the setting. Diving right into The Phantom Menace, I am going to give I don't know if it's a hot take. It's a very niche take. One of my favorite parts of The Phantom Menace is Shmi Skywalker.
Oh, okay.
I love the music that surrounds Shmi. If you're familiar with Shmi's theme, that's kind of the pan flute type of music that plays when Anakin and Shmi are saying goodbye. I love looking at the relationship between Shmi and Anakin, and they really did an excellent job building the closeness between the mother and her son, and it made it very believable in the following movies when he lost her, how that could cause him so much pain. The scene where they are saying goodbye to each other for the last time in The Phantom Menace just rips my heart out every time I watch it.
You can feel the heartbreak.
Oh, you sure can.
Well, and I feel like I feel like Phantom Menace is not, a film that people laud for its acting. But I feel like Pernilla August actually does a pretty good job
He absolutely does.
in that movie. Like she really sells. She's having to deliver some
Famous George
I would say
Lucas
like a bit
lines.
very cliche dialogue.
That we love.
And
we
I
love.
think she does it believably.
Yeah.
She absolutely does.
And yeah, I think on telling you talk about like, the Skywalker family tree. A lot of people start with Anakin and Padme. Those characters are so beloved, but it's really Shmi
Mhm.
that launches.
She's the
down that
matriarch
path,
of the
and I remember her.
Skywalkers.
Yeah.
Well, that's
I like
terrific,
it.
and it's so fun
Yeah.
to see her come back in the Clone Wars as well.
Mm-hmm. Just as heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking, just as confusing.
I like that because I think she is a character that a lot of people don't regard or don't think about very often, and especially in that movie where there's so many characters, so many. It's introduction to all of these new prequel characters that, besides Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Yoda, they're basically all new. Even the Sidious Palpatine is basically a different character because you don't know anything about him in Return of Jedi or Empire. So I like that. That's a good one that I hadn't really thought about. Honestly, I'm in the same boat as you were kind of saying, as I don't think about her that often.
No, and we should. We should. She's a terrific character. I would be so intrigued to find out more about her background with Anakin. They don't give us a whole lot there, and I'd be intrigued to see how they got to where they got to.
Well,
All
so
right, what are we thinking?
thinking of her, the sequence on Tatooine, or at least more specifically the the podcast, the pod racing sequence. The pod racing sequence for me is what drew me in as a kid. Phantom Menace, I watched it when I was a kid. I remember my first Star Wars memory is seeing a friend building a Lego pod racer, Anakin's pod racer. And I love that sequence. It's so thrilling. It's so fun when we think of like, okay, this is a movie for 12-year-olds. I was like, yeah. And this is exactly what I like about that, because it's so exciting. And it's like, I want to do that. I want to be there. I want to see that because it's so fun. I loved the Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. I played that all the time on the N64 when I was a kid. And that was a great game. I always hear new lap record in my head whenever I see it. And so that sequence and seeing all of the different aliens, all the different species that we're introduced to, everything with Sebulba, all of it just revolving around Anakin is easily my favorite sequence in at least the prequels, I think, if not all of Star Wars.
Well, and I think it's really unique to Phantom Menace. Like, we don't really see pod racing come back in any capacity outside of like ancillary material. So I think it's a really unique thing. And in the movie, up until that point, really the only action we had gotten was kind of the escaping the sea creatures um on Naboo, and then like getting like rescuing the queen and getting off planet. We had not really seen like a really like high speed anything up until that point, and I think it's just so good. Like the sound design, the set design, the creature design, the CG holds up really well.
Oh, it does.
It is so and so intense, and the lack of score there. Phantom Menace is like renowned for having such a good score, and there's so little of it until the very end. You're just listening to all the motors of the pod racers, and it's just a fantastic sequence.
It's funny that you brought up sound design. I was going to say that is my number one favorite piece of the pod racing sequence.
I took in college we had to take an art class, and I took intro to film for mine, and we actually studied the pod race as like a really good film scene. We looked at it in terms of sound design and blocking. Like the way that like it does a really good job of making sure you're never confused about where anybody is in the race. It's like a really hard thing to do in chase scenes. And how I did that really well. So it's not often that a prequel movie comes up in like discussion of art. So,
Right.
I think it's awesome.
Which
It's
is
a testament to
it's a shame.
how great
It's a shame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people disregard the prequel movies. There are a lot of excellently shot sequences. We're going to talk about them, today, that should get some love that don't. And I would say that the originals have no better shots than the prequels have. The dialogue certainly isn't that much better. I don't think.
You can write those lines, but you can't say them.
Can't say
Can't say 'em.
But yeah, I love the for the pod race too, that throughout kind of the originals and up to that point, we hardly ever see any cultural parts of the Star Wars universe. But that really adds this whole cultural. There's a giant stadium, and I love reading about like what the Bunta Eve, what that actually holiday is, and that there's a whole backstory for it now. And we again, even after that, hardly see stuff like that. And so I liked what it represents there, of like there is a galaxy with culture and sports and all the stuff that we look like or we have in our world that they also have. They're a little bit more wild and crazy, but they have them.
It's funny that you mentioned that. We've seen Tatooine twice before at this point, in A New Hope and Return of the Jedi. And neither of them, maybe in some deleted scenes, but neither of them really show a culture. It shows a farm and an underworld. And we see a city, um, but there's something special about the community that the Phantom Menace creates on Tatooine. It feels lived in. People always say the original trilogy feels lived in. I think Tatooine and the Phantom Menace feels lived in.
Yeah.
Um, Speaking in that general area, one thing that I think that we need to give Phantom Menace some props on is their mixture of practical and digital effects. Um, Phantom Menace, of course, I think a lot of people don't give it credit for having the first fully digital character in Jar Jar Binks. And, people's thoughts on the character aside, he's a technological marvel. And he allowed future filmmakers to do so much more because of what George Lucas started. And we think of the original trilogy as, the great pillar of special effects, which is absolutely true. But the prequel trilogy is just as much true, and you can see that with this movie, with the digital effects they do, but also the way they combine practical effects, and it feels real. Um, so I think it's important to shout that aspect out as well.
Well, and to tie it back to the pod race, I think a lot of people forget that the stadium is practical.
Yeah.
That was a miniature that they built, and it looks so good. Nobody believes that that's a practical set.
It's a bunch of Q-tips.
Thousands of Q-tips. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And the amount of time that they put in to color each of those differently to make it look like a real audience is
Oh,
amazing.
you can't tell.
Star Wars always goes into so much detail, so many little things that you don't notice. That's, part of set design is kind of stuff that doesn't stand out is indicative of good set design.
To do a quick plug before I move on to my thing, if you haven't watched it yet, on Disney Plus, they just released the second season of Light and Magic, which is the documentary series about the Industrial Light and Magic, the special effects wing of Lucasfilm. Can't recommend it enough, 10 out of 10. But the first episode of season 2 was all about Phantom Menace, and they talk a lot about the pod races. That's the pod race from Jar Jar Binks, pretty much the whole episode. And so can't recommend it enough. Um, Moving on to the thing I wanted to highlight from the movie, and that is the Senate. Like the actual structure of the Senate, like the physical structure of the Senate, like the way they have all the pods that can detach to allow the senators to go speak. But it also just created like this amazing set piece that followed the characters throughout the whole series. We see it a lot in Attack of the Clones and way more in Revenge of the Sith, to the point where it's even like a scene of a fight, of a battle. And then we've even got to see it used in the animated shows, and especially now in Andor, which is like, I think it seems so natural and intuitive the way that it's designed. You just kind of like goes under the radar. But that was a very creative idea they had. And that scene where Padme calls for the vote of no confidence, I think back in 1999, people gave that scene a lot of crap for being like slow and political, but I think we've learned that George Lucas was right. His apologies about how important like trade things are into the actual like function of a society, and the way that business has influence in politics, and so I think that scene in Phantom Menace, but also just like the structure of the Senate that we heard about in the original trilogy was really genius and gets forgotten.
I like how you brought up that people gave it so much crap. 10-year-old me, I loved it. I loved that scene. It helped that Padme was always one of my favorite characters, which I think we'll probably have to do a whole analysis on. Both the Austins in this show, it's Padme's their favorite character. She's so powerful with her speaking, and I think that's an instance where Queen Amidala's more monotone really works. She's saying it very unemotionally to the boon of the scene, where the scene works better because she's not emotional about it.
I think one of the things that stood out for me is I got to use that Senate scene and a vote of no confidence in college. I was studying public policy and political science and looking into different systems of government, looking at what a parliamentary system is and knowing what a vote of no confidence in and how that system works, the difference between a prime minister and a president. And I love that introduced so many people to this idea of a different system that they just were unaware of, I think. And I think that's one really cool thing about Star Wars is it brings in more worldly things than from one country or just one place. And that's one scene that stands out to me of looking at it and be like, I don't know what this means, but I find out later that it's a real world thing and that it has real world implications. And then this is something that happens. When I first watched it, I had no idea. But now I think about that, I'm like, oh yeah, like that has happened many times throughout my lifetime. And I've seen it play across other countries and what happens and all of that stuff. And so I love that that's included.
It that scene really stood out to me a lot as a child. I remember when my brother and I were little, we wanted to play Star Wars. He wanted to play Jedi, and I wanted to play Senate. And I remember going to school and like learning about like the actual American Senate and being disappointed that most of our senators like wore suits and looked like Mitch McConnell and not Natalie Portman.
And also didn't float. They also don't float.
Yeah. So talk about prequels. Do we want to move on to Attack of the Clones and our favorite things from that movie?
Absolutely.
Let's do it.
All right. So for me, coming from watching the originals and hearing about Jedi Knights, the keepers of peace and justice throughout the galaxy, Attack of the Clones, my favorite thing is actually getting to see a lot of Jedi in action, right? We see Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon in Phantom Menace in action, but getting to see so many of the Jedi show up on Geonosis and fight and act and do stuff makes that order feel much larger. And now knowing that it's only a microcosm, that's 200 survivors or 200 there, or rather, is such a small part of the order, but getting to see that it's a much larger group, they're doing so much more, was really eye-opening for me watching that movie. And I can't get over the entire Geonosis sequence from the start of Anakin and Padme getting wheeled out there to the end of the fight between Dooku and Yoda is just so magical.
I'm glad I had it back up because that was mine.
Yeah.
Was the seeing all the Jedi on Geonosis. I think that was like such a formative thing. Like as a prequel kid growing up, was like everybody had their favorite background Jedi.
Yes.
Like I know I really latched on to Kit Fisto and Shock T. Like those are the two that like
You've got
was
to with
obsessed
that
with.
smile.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah. Attack of the Clones, Kit Fisto is superior over Revenge of the Sith. Kit Fisto.
Yeah.
I stand by it. But just getting to see all that and like seeing just I think it was probably like 30 or 40 different distinct Jedi light up their lightsabers in that scene was really cool. It was just like as a kid that was just the stuff dreams were made of.
And one of the things with those Jedi, the alien design in this particular episode, I think of all the Star Wars movies, Attack of the Clones nails alien design with the Togruta, the Nautolan, the Myrlian. All of those were original to this movie, I believe. Is that true? Or at least they were.
What you just said, Jeff.
Yeah, they were all at least designed for the movie. If they appeared earlier, it would have been as part of the lead-up process.
The Kaminoans too in Kaminoans for that movie.
Absolutely stunning looking. And there's all of these different appearances. They're so different. Before all the aliens we've seen, everything feels very muted, very brown, with the exception of maybe the Twi'leks. Whereas they're really colorful aliens. They're very sophisticated aliens with the Kaminoans. They're very elegant. And it's nice to see all these different alien cultures, especially with the Kaminoans. I think they have such an interesting culture unto themselves that, I think other movies haven't been able to capture as well.
Is that your thing as well? Was just the alien design, or was that just what made you think of it?
Which on me? Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Which made
Okay.
me
I
think of
wasn't
that.
sure if you just
Oh, that was
wanted to
not my
talk
thing,
more about it,
actually.
or if that's like your
No,
favorite
it
thing
just
from Attack of the
that
Clones.
just
Because
made me think about that.
I was a little surprised if that was going to be it, because I think I know what your favorite thing is going to be.
Yeah, and I think I'm
Well,
gonna get right
it's a good
across the coals.
I was just, actually that's going to tie into my backup.
Oh, sure.
So, my backup is the Arena Beasts.
Oh,
That
yeah.
the Reek, the Nixu, and the Acklay. I think they were so cool. As a kid, I had a toy Reek and a toy Nixu. My I went home recently, and my nephew was there, and he was playing with my old toys. He was playing with the Reek, and it meant brought a little smile to my face to see it living on. But I didn't have the heart to tell him it wasn't a real dinosaur. I let him keep.
Better than a dinosaur.
Yeah, but I just think they were so cool, and I want to say it was either Doug Chang or Ian McKay who designed those, and they were giving an interview talking about like how they designed each of the monsters to kind of like reflect Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Padme. So like the Reek was like Anakin's monster, and it was like
Oh.
brash and just heavy and just knocked things around. And then Obi-Wan fought the Acolyte, and it was like precise with its strikes and was like very like calculated. And then the Nixu was like slinky and cat-like and kind of feminine, so it kind of reflected Padme. It was just so fun, like watching each of the characters have to like interact with them, seeing how Anakin like used the Force to like calm the Reek down before he jumped on his back, and Obi-Wan figured out how to get it to break his cuffs and all the stuff, and Padme getting on top of the pillar, using the chain and everything. That was just like a phenomenal scene.
I love the Acclay's sound design. It's so
Oh,
terrifying, but also just so good. I still have some nightmares of playing the original Star Wars Battlefront 2 and having those run up to you on Felucia.
Oh yeah, Felucia.
Fighting them was terrifying.
All right. Are you guys ready for me to just say something awful? One of
Lay it
my
on us.
favorite parts of Star Wars Episode 2 Attack of the Clones is the romance between Anakin and Padme.
I knew it was coming. I knew it was coming.
Oh yeah.
I love it. I will defend it until the day I die. I don't care what anyone says. There is something about this sweeping romance. The dialogue is unrealistic, and it makes me feel swoony every time. I don't care. The way they're so awkward with each other, it's so like it's so real and it's so not real at the same time. And I love watching them fall in love in this beautiful place. And something that I think is really interesting is the end of the movie. It's like the implications of what have they just done. Like Anakin just broke all of his vows, and Padme helped him do it. And now we're just standing here basically by ourselves, staring at the sunset. And it feels like it should be a happy moment, but with the rise of the Clone Wars and everything they've just done, it feels kind of melancholy at the same time. Um, I don't know why this just popped into my brain. It almost makes me feel like the end of The Graduate when they're sitting on the bus.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh shit, we've just kind of ruined our lives. And it almost feels like that for Anakin and Padme. It's certainly not the model of a healthy relationship. But there's something about it that I just love. I actually unironically love the dialogue. And I think that the really disgustingly over the top romantic statements are fun. So I really enjoy it. And one of my favorite shots of the entire I'm going to say the entire series is the shot of Anakin and Padme in the carriage going into the arena as they're kissing, and the camera pans out and up into the arena towards Count Dooku. I just that shot is beautiful, and I get chills every time I watch it. Makes me feel weepy every time I watch it. There's a lot of nostalgia for this particular movie for me. And whether or not it's the cinematically perfect movie, which it's not, it holds a very special place in my heart, and it's definitely considered among my favorite Star Wars movies.
And I would be remiss if I didn't mention. I agree 100%. I love Anakin Padme romances. Attack of the Clones was my first Star Wars movie in theaters, and that was the thing I latched on to as a kid. I knew you were going to pick it, so that's why I didn't pick that one. But I think we would be remiss not talking about one of my favorite things as a kid growing up with both Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith was the deleted scenes on the DVDs
Yes.
as a kid. And so much of Anakin and Padme's relationship and just like Padme in general is in those scenes. And I think spending so much time like on those like behind the scenes bonus features, like watching those deleted scenes and all the documentaries, that's a huge reason I'm a big fan today.
I think one of the deleted scenes that's not brought up very often, the Attack of the Clones one of the Nabiri household, and seeing them in Padme's home and seeing her family and her sister and all of that is one that people don't talk about very often, but I think it's a really important one because you kind of see them almost in a normal situation, right?
Yeah.
Versus all this war and fighting and craziness that's going on.
Well, and it really goes to show like the dichotomy between Anakin and Padme. Like on the Naboo scenes, everything's lush and beautiful, and there's water everywhere and greenery. And Padme's in this like loving home, and like she has like a mother and a sister and nieces that love her, and the people adore her and everything. And you go to Tatooine, and you're confronted with Anakin's former slave master, his wife's or his mother's husband, who he's never met before, his step siblings that he's never met before, ever knew existed, and then the death of his mother. And so like you have like this idyllic scenario that allowed like love to bloom, but then you're like contrasting it with like the reason why it's never going to work out. I think is a really poignant thing that gets lost. Like I understand structurally the movie was too long. I understand why they had to cut those scenes.
The longest, right?
Some of the
Episode 8 is now.
Yeah,
The Last Jedi is, but before that it was
yes.
episode 2.
Yeah, that's right.
Anything else you guys had to say? Oh, I'm sorry. I gotta say it. Across the Stars.
Yeah, I knew it was coming too. I knew it.
It is, there are so many great pieces of music in Star Wars, especially the prequel trilogy. Across the Stars is my number one favorite piece of Star Wars music ever. And, I don't think that it's just because it's associated with Anakin and Padme. Anytime it pops up in other Star Wars media, I just get excited. Like, it just feels like there's so much hope in that song, which is so ironic because their relationship is hopeless. But I think it's one of the most beautiful pieces that John Williams has ever put together.
It very much like highlights them as star-crossed lovers, right? Across the Stars is very pointed towards a Romeo and Juliet, a romance that will never work out, cannot succeed no matter what.
Another romance that I love, and
yeah,
I don't.
Moving on to Revenge of the Sith, and continuing to talk about tragedy. My favorite thing for Revenge of the Sith is Order 66.
Yeah.
I think it was such a brilliantly well done scene. As a kid, I remember like the tragedy of watching it in theaters, and as a kid that like played with all the toys and like even read some of the comics and stuff, like watching those like minor Jedi we grew to love. It was just from things we made up in our minds. Watching them die was so tragic. And evidently, modern day Lucasfilm's a big fan of it too, because they make us relive it. It seems like it never it seems like we're always dealing with Order 66 in some capacity, just about every year, and something new going on. But it's just such a well done scene. The Williams score is beautiful. You're getting the contrast of everything happening on Coruscant. And then looking across the galaxy, seeing all these really cool planets that you see for like maybe a grand total of 8 seconds that we've thankfully seen explored in other places. Watching the Jedi get gunned down, and it's a scene that's been like recontextualized a lot over the years because when we watched Revenge of the Sith when it came out, the clones were doing it. They were just following orders, but now there's like the whole tragedy of like the microchips and everything that was introduced in Clone Wars. but you see all of this like really heavy stuff and ending it with Padme crying about everything that's going on, just really like solidifies how tragic of a situation it is.
It still hits. It still hits so hard.
It does.
You know it's coming, but the one scene that hits me is Ki-Adi-Mundi, who is so frustrating as a Jedi, so frustrating on the council. But you see him, his realization of like, oh no, something's happening, and he deflects a few, but can't stand up to them, and that hurts because you don't like him, but you still see the look of betrayal on his face, and that he doesn't have time to really process what's happening. That's the one that always in that scene always hits me.
How about that opening scene?
Oh, that was one of my two.
The opening scene of that movie is, I feel like I'll be mocked for saying this. The long shot is just stunning from the way it pans down from the opening crawl to moving into the long shot and weaving between the ships. And it starts out, you don't realize exactly what's going on. You see like one ship, and then you see another ship, and then you realize it pans down further, and we're in all-out war above Coruscant. Going into it, did we expect it? Yes, we did. Why? Because we watched Clone Wars. And we loved every minute of it. But it's terrific. The score is terrific. Sound design, again, terrific.
Well, and we really had not seen anything of that scale up until that
No.
point. Seeing, I forget what the Republic cruisers are called, but like the Central Star Destroyers, yeah, seeing so many of those going up against the Trade Federation ships. That like one of those Trade Federation ships was like the whole action set piece in Phantom Menace, and now there's like you can see as many as far as the eye can see. They're all over the planet, and
what are they called? Who can do it?
Lucre Hulk.
Lucre Hulk.
Yep.
I couldn't have guessed it for $1 million. But and that scene was originally like an hour long. Like the original version of the script, that scene went on for so long. And like I think it's really like the only like fun you have
it is.
in Revenge of the Sith. Like it's pretty much that, and like maybe some of the Obi-Wan stuff on Utapau. Pretty much everything else is just like tragedy. And so you really get to see, it's like the happiest we see Anakin and Obi-Wan. But you really get to see them
as brothers
at the best of their relationship.
Yeah.
You get Grievous from that scene. You get the end of Dooku. You get really get to see like Palpatine coming like full force. Like it's really, it's hard to beat that scene.
Yeah, we get some great memes out of it.
Yeah, do it.
Best line ever.
Do it.
Yeah. I love it. It shows you how much this is a galactic conflict, right?
Mm-hmm.
That coming into it's like, the battle on Geonosis, it was big, but that sells that this is a huge engagement with a lot of people. But you also see Anakin still wanting to do the right thing of going to help the other pilots in the ARC 170s. I'll throw that out there.
Now we're just going off.
Yeah, a little bit. Practicing. But you get to see him and Obi-Wan, a little bit of conflict between them, but also a lot of fun between them of the elevator sequence and stuff like that. That is a little bit of fun in a movie that doesn't have a lot of fun.
It was really important that they had this first act in the movie. Otherwise, it would have just been an absolute spiral. Well, it is kind of a spiral of a movie, but at least we start in a higher place.
Yeah, you start from behind. It makes the spiral further.
Yeah.
We mentioned him.
Oh, I was to say, let me take us to a much lower place and the culmination of tragedy, if I could.
Of course.
With the fight between Anakin and Obi-Wan on Mustafar. The speed of the lightsaber fight is unbelievable. And knowing that Hayden and Ewan like practiced for days and weeks to be able to do it, and it's so good. And you feel the hate and anger of Hayden and the entire sequence with the music. That all together is easily my favorite lightsaber fight. That's not even close for me, but so much more around it. And love seeing the interuse of the Force when they pause and both stick out their hands and then push each other away at the same time. That's kind of stuff we see, in Attack of the Clones, a mixture where you have a battle of Force powers and then they stop. And then Yoda and Dooku do a battle of lightsabers. But this is an intermixing of that. And we have rarely kind of seen something like that. That scene, it always blows me away. It always breaks my heart.
And I think it seems unique for a couple of reasons. One, George always talks about how he had the prequels fully planned in his mind. That's definitely not true.
Hey, it's more fun to believe that. It's more fun to believe.
Right. Yeah, it's more fun. But this scene is actually something that we have like documented proof that he was like thinking about this in the 80s.
Volcano.
That he's like, Anakin and Obi-Wan had a fight on a volcano planet, and that's why Darth Vader looks the way he does.
Yeah.
And
it's so random.
Yeah,
they just had a fight on a volcano. Duh.
But seeing that come to fruition is really and done so well. There's a lot of things people rake over the coals from the prequel era, but this is something that's like almost universally agreed is like a great thing. But another thing that's really awesome about it is the intersplicing it with the Yoda Dooku fight, or the Yoda Palpatine fight. Yeah. And seeing that fight in the Senate and watching those two go at it, like the two, I would say Anakin and Obi-Wan are like kind of like the characters that we're like the most emotionally invested in, and then Yoda and Dooku are like that's like the best Jedi, the best Sith. Yeah, sorry, Sidious. Yeah, it's the best Jedi, the best Sith, just going at it. And I think that was really like seeing those things together was
go back and forth. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because this entire time that we've been talking about the prequel movies, we haven't talked about the best acting for the entirety of the prequel movies.
You talk about Ian
McDiarmid.
Yeah.
Best actor in the prequels, especially in Revenge of the Sith. He gives such an amazing performance. It's so over the top. What is it that George always says?
Faster, more intense.
And he kept telling Ian to make it bigger and bigger and bigger. And it felt ridiculous to Ian, but it created just one of the most beloved set of lines for any character in all of Star Wars. Unlimited power. It's so good. And I think he understood the assignment. This is a Shakespearean actor. I mean, he does stage work, and he just clearly understood this. This was an over-the-top assignment. It wasn't a movie performance. This was a stage performance where we're larger and more intense. And it kind of his performance encapsulates the entirety of the prequel trilogy, where it's loud,
Yeah, I agree. I love him. I love just the acting, for the most part, the acting of Revenge of the Sith. Obi-Wan and Anakin do feel more like brothers in this, and you see the interplay between them, and I just it's such a fun film too, despite the tragedy, despite the hard and difficult things that happen with Order 66 or the fall of Anakin Skywalker. I love it.
Getting out of the prequels, do we want to move on to one of our most recent films?
Of course.
Yeah.
Truthfully, don't have as much to say about it, because I've seen it twice.
You only seen it twice. Big fan.
Big fan. Hey, okay, so I don't know if we want to dive into this right now. I am once again going to give a hot Star Wars take. Han Solo's not one of my favorite characters. He's just not one of my favorite characters. I love that people love him. I love that they feel that connection to him, but he doesn't do as much for me. That being said, Alden Ehrenreich's performance as Han Solo is absolutely stellar. He gives such a good performance. I believe it's Han Solo. I love that he didn't try to do a Harrison Ford impersonation. Um, it really does feel like a younger version of the character, though. And it really makes me sad. Originally we were supposed to see some more with Solo, and it seems like that's probably not going to be the case at this point. And I would have loved to see him perform more within the Star Wars universe. I thought he was a terrific actor. Very believable. Um, so I very much enjoyed his parts of the movie.
I'm hoping he gets his Hayden Christensen moment,
Yes.
I hope so.
where he's able to
Yeah.
come back and
Or he's Ahmed
do
Best.
good. I
Mhm.
think it's not really fair, but people really just like were not able to let go of Harrison Ford
Mhm.
in that role. And it's interesting. I think like we all have characters that in performance we latch on to. But I was whenever they were like, we're going to do a solo move with a new actor, I was like, great, on board. I didn't have any like, I mean, because Harrison Ford's old now. Like, it doesn't make sense that he's going to play a version that was younger than he was in 1977.
Right.
And but some people just weren't able to let go. And maybe it's just because, like, again, Han is not one of my favorite characters either. And so like he's not as precious to me. So like, I'm willing to like see, I guess, more creative things done with them. But I agree. I thought Alden was great. Actually, I mean, I don't have any documented proof of this, but I saw Alden in the movie called Hail Caesar, and when they like announced they were doing a solo movie, I'm like, that guy from Hail Caesar, I bet he would be good on Solo. And I feel very bad.
You know what? I
Wow.
want the receipts. Go back, look at your text, find it somewhere.
Yeah.
I like Solo. I like Han Solo, the character. I wouldn't say he's one of my favorites, but I do like what he represents, and we'll talk about him later when we talk about A New Hope and some of my favorite parts of that movie. But for me, Solo is it's a movie about Han Solo, but it's so much more about the underworld, and that's my favorite part of Star Wars. Is for years we heard about the level 1313 game, but then Star Wars Underworld, the show, and that never really came to fruition. But it felt like this starts to be that.
Yeah,
Where we get to see a lot of the underworld, we get to see some of the gangsters and different people, and so the kind of like Crimson Dawn and Dryden Voss and all of that really
Kira.
is and Kira. Yeah. That's a highlight for me. I thought Kira is a great character. I like Dryden Voss. I like seeing the different underworld characters that we see with Beckett, Tobias Beckett. Thinking of Woody Harrelson in a Star Wars movie, not my first choice, but he did such a good job with it. I wouldn't have pictured it before that, but I think he does so well with it that now I can't picture it another way. And so I really liked that it's a Star Wars movie, but it is not about any of the sequence of the Skywalker saga, right? That could have been taken and kind of plucked in that timeline and then just put somewhere else. And you could call that Han Solo character something else, and it still would have been a great Star Wars movie.
Absolutely. It's so interesting that all of these elements were introduced in the Solo movie that have continued even now, however many, it's been 7 years later. This is the foundation of the current Star Wars underworld, really. And, having the return of Darth Maul, which must have been so confusing for people who've never seen anything but the movies. And I love that they just did it. They just did it. And I think that's brilliant. And I love it. People will catch up. They'll figure it out. And if they don't care, and they don't need to look into it. But Darth Maul was awesome. Seeing him appear in theaters was so exciting. And seeing Kira as I guess a kind of a servant of his, and I'm so intrigued. I haven't gotten through all the underworld pieces. I don't know if we have kind of seen her overthrow Maul at all, or if that's kind of left a mystery still. I don't know if that'll be in the new Maul show.
We haven't seen that happen, but we do see Kira as the leader of Crimson Dawn during the later reign of the Empire during the war with the rebellion.
Yeah,
but we don't know.
Also see her in Outlaws.
Yes,
love it.
Yeah, same era.
I love Outlaws, so that's exciting. It's a fun movie, and it's one of those movies that I just don't think to watch, and I wish I did. This is one of the Star Wars movies that's just fun. Like, I think it's just fun.
Getting into my favorite thing from Solo, which that was Dryden Voss's yacht. I thought that was such a cool set piece. In the movies we had gotten up until this point in the Disney era, so like Force Awakens, Rogue One, and Last Jedi, we had not seen much luxurious Star Wars. We had gotten Canto Bight, and I like Canto Bight, but that didn't feel like sleek and cool luxurious. It was more like opulent type luxurious. And so I thought Dryden Voss's yacht was like really unique, kind of getting a bit of that Coruscant element back into Star Wars, and all the sleek black and white and gold and everything, the cool aliens. I love the little frog jazz singer and his little like jar.
Yeah. What about the servants with the half the head cut off?
Decraniated.
The decraniated. It's fascinating character design. I'm intrigued to what happened there.
That's a Dr. Evazan from A New Hope. He's the one that did that. So I love that ties in to another character we already knew from the originals.
Yeah. Found out what he used his degree for.
Was this his thesis?
Yeah, how to make brainless servants. But yeah, I thought that was really cool. It was cool seeing Kira. Dryden Voss was a very interesting character, and his fight scene at the end was really neat. We haven't gotten a lot of fight scenes in Star Wars that weren't lightsaber or blaster. And so I think his little daggers and the spear and everything, that was a cool scene. I loved the Indiana Jones Easter egg of the crystal skull being one of his like treasures. I thought that was a fun little treat, Harrison Ford reference. But yeah, I thought it was a cool scene, and it's people don't really talk about it. It's like one of the great set pieces of Star Wars or anything, but I think it's an underrated gem.
I'll also just throw out that Paul Bettany does such a great job as Dryden Voss on that yacht. He's calm, but he's also menacing, and it's like a switch is flipped, and he does such a good job with that.
And he, fun fact about Solo, I don't know if you remember or not, he wasn't the original Dryden Voss. There was another guy that played Dryden Voss, and he couldn't come back for the extensive reshoots they did when they changed directors, and so they had to recast Paul Bettany as Dryden.
I would have been very intrigued to see that version of the movie, but we weren't meant to.
Okay.
I do love me some Ron Howard, so here we go, Ron Howard.
Yeah.
Shall we move on to Rogue One?
Yeah.
Rogue One is one of the most brilliant Star Wars movies ever made. Fight me.
I don't think anyone's gonna need to fight. I think everyone agrees for the most part, especially when you add Andor onto it.
Yeah.
That I think it's only it happens with most Star Wars projects is when something is added to provide more context, provide more information, or tie into it, it creates more an appreciation for that original thing, whether that's an original movie or the TV show or something else. And Rogue One, I think when the concept was launched, people were like, why do we need that? What's the point? But it's phenomenal.
Well, and not only that, I think people really, now that we have so much extra Star Wars, you kind of like lose sight of it. But Rogue One was like a really big deal to have a non-saga Star Wars film. It was our first, like theatrically released film that didn't have anything to do with the main 6 movies or that
Skywalker saga.
So the Skywalker saga, and obviously it was like directly tied to it. But doing a movie that didn't involve the Force or anything like that, it was like actually like really leaning into the war aspect of Star Wars. That was a neat changed, and they nailed it, thankfully.
And so many characters that we had never heard of before, and you don't really get to know them all that well, right? That was a big criticism when it first came out, is the character growth, that you don't really see, you don't see their motivation and stuff like that. But now with all of that additional information and additional stories and stuff, it doesn't hurt me. It doesn't affect me anymore, because it is a very fast movie.
Yeah,
it is. Andor really highlighted that. 'Cause I watched Rogue One right after finishing Andor. Like, oh my god, this movie is just zooming. It's just boom, 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 boom.
So what?
It felt like it was like the light seat skipping in.
right.
Yeah. So what would you guys say is your favorite aspects of Rogue One? One of our favorites overall.
Well, I hate to say, the big one for me is the third act of that movie. The downfall of Scarif, getting the plans to the Tantive 4, and their escape, is so stunning, and ending the movie with a surprise Princess Leia turning around and her saying "hope" just chills filling me every single time. Um, Obviously the main cast gave terrific performances. I'm really glad that they went with a everyone dies ending, to be honest. I thought that it just made the movie and the sacrifices just that much more meaningful. And watching them knowing that they're going to die and just standing there and hugging, and when Cassian's like, your father would be proud. Um, First of all, the actual score to that, Your Father Would Be Proud, is awesome as it builds into Hope, the score from the very end of the movie. Both of those pieces are two of my favorite Star Wars score pieces of score altogether.
And the fact that Michael Giacchino did the score in 6 weeks is just
Unbelievable.
insane.
Yeah.
It's terrific.
And what a lift for someone to score a Star Wars movie that's not John Williams, right? To step into those shoes of someone
Really, the first
so
one
idolized.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Unless
He
we
does
count the
such a
Clone
good job.
Wars.
What would you say, Austin, is your favorite aspect of Rogue One?
So my favorite part of Rogue One is Jin's speech to the Rebel Council. I think it was so good. I think that's a scene that we go back to a lot. Kind of getting to see like how the rebellion functioned. We had really only seen it in passing in the original trilogy. Kind of getting the scene where they evaluate the Death Star plans in A New Hope, and then kind of the same scene in Return of the Jedi, but seeing Jin kind of like shake these people and being like, the time to act now. Like, we can't debate any further about like what we're going to do. Like, this may have the weapon that's going to kill us all. And I think just the earnestness of her. She really continues Star Wars trend of having inspiring young brunette women, just really save the day. But getting to see Mon Mothma and Bail Organa kind of at their prime, that's a little less novel now, coming off of Andor. At the time, that was a really big deal. And Admiral Raddus, what a great character! Like, I say we fight. Like, what a great.
I have Raddus on my list.
Would get you hyped up. Yeah. And I forget their names, but they're really the three useless senators. They just kept that track record going in Andor. But you have to have somebody to provide conflict, I guess. But I think that scene's fantastic.
Can we talk about the brilliant return and the excellent idea to bring back Genevieve O'Reilly as Mon Mothma? Obviously, she's great in this movie, but this movie led to her, hopefully, fingers crossed, Emmy Award-winning performance in Andor. They could have just cast anyone as Mon Mothma, because she was in the lead scene, and they said, you know what, we're gonna do it. We're gonna keep continuity with these deleted scenes, and her performances in everything. I really want to see more of her work, because she puts everything into these performances, and she is Mon Mothma. And then Jimmy Smith's too.
Yeah.
I love Jimmy Smith. Until we get Benjamin Bratt. I'll select Benjamin Bratt. It worked.
It worked.
It was good.
Talking about actors, my favorite part of Rogue One, and perhaps my only one of these where it's just a character Orson Krennic.
Yes.
He's so good as a
Yeah.
high-level Imperial, and Ben Mendelsohn does such a good job with it. I talked about other people where it's like, oh, at one point they're calm, but then they're menacing, and he does that throughout. But he's also so kind of slimy almost, where it's like, oh, when he's talking to Galen Erso, and he's like, well, what are you talking about? You're all coming. Like, and then just throughout that movie, he does such a good job being, talking with Tarkin. You see that he's not as high up as he really wants to be or pretends he is, and his interactions with Vader as well, where he's like, good, you'll tell the Emperor then, and then he's getting choked, and it's like, oh,
To choke on your aspirations direction.
Exactly. Yeah.
I like that image that since Andor came out of him poking Deirdre's head, and then Tarkin poking his head, and Vader poking his head. I just think it's so funny because he feels like this really high up character, and then we see him interact with Tarkin and Vader, and he's just a small person.
Right. Yeah. And so his character is I think my favorite character addition to the Star Wars universe in any one film, I think, because it's just so good. And he's been in many different things now. He's in the Bad Batch. He is in Thrawn Treason, the third one of the first trilogy for Timothy Zahn. He shows up in Andor, and so he's been kind of spreading out, one of those characters that starts to appear like a Saw Gerrera. It starts to appear in all of these different things, and is kind of just good in everything. I like seeing him, and yeah, I think that film really brought in such a great character.
Well, I think it's really difficult to make a unique Star Wars villain at this point. Like, in the lead up to Krennic, you had all these like really iconic villains in pop culture, like Darth Vader, Darth Maul, Palpatine, Dooku, Boba Fett. You had all these like very famous, like maybe most famous of any film series, of villains, and like create someone that can stand out amongst all those characters and not just feel like a Tarkin clone or whatever. I think is really special. But you did mention Saw Gerrera. I think we can't go by it without mentioning Saw Gerrera, and like the fact that it was so. I remember being like, "Oh my God, they're bringing back this like really minor character from 3 episodes of Clone Wars, as like a major character, and we have not known peace since."
No, he's everywhere. Oh my,
he's everywhere. Yeah,
and he's so different.
Order 66 come back to haunt us all the time,
right? He's so different from how he originally appeared, and it's funny to see that transition. I almost feel like I think is he in the Bad Batch?
Yeah, he is.
He was, and he still looks like his Clone Wars self.
Like that, yeah.
And then at some point, you turn into Forrest Whitaker.
Yeah.
I think that's so funny. So Rogue One, Jeddah is such a cool planet.
Yeah.
It's so interesting to see. The Force Awakens kind of started this, but Rogue One really dove into different Force religious sects, which was so interesting. It wasn't, as a kid watching these, I never thought, oh, there's different denominations of Force belief. So it's so interesting that this movie really dove into a different culture's perspective on the Force. And seeing all these artifacts and these statues of Jedi, and they're worshiping the Force. And I think it's fascinating to treat the Force. It's always been, I guess, a religion, but to see it more as like a structured religion is very interesting.
Yeah. And I'll always plug the High Republic. The Battle of Jeddah audiobook is a great expansion of what Jeddah is, because it's not just a place for the Jedi, but there's multiple different sects, multiple different religions revolving around the Force 380 years before the Battle of Yavin that have a convocation there, and they all meet and talk about the Force and what these different groups are doing. And I love that Rogue One brought a place like that to us.
So we are running a little long. So I think what we've decided to do is make this a 2-part episode. So our next episode in 2 weeks, that'll be A New Hope through Rise of Skywalker, covering the last 6 movies. But I'd really enjoyed this conversation.
I have
It's
to,
fun to
actually.
hear what you guys like.
Isn't it so much fun to talk about what we love instead of
Yeah,
what we hate?
it is.
Thank you, Rose.
Thank you, Rose.
I was about to say that.
Rose.
Yeah, I was like, I would rather save what I love than fight what I hate.
People make fun of that line. I love that line. I love it. I
true.
don't. It's so true.
Oh, let's save
Let's
this.
save it. We'll save it.
Yeah,
We'll save
yeah.
it.
Might need to change what I wrote down for that.
I know, right?
Cool. Well, yeah,
all
we
right.
will see you in 2 weeks where we'll be talking about our favorite things from the original trilogy as well as the sequel trilogy. But for now, this is going to be Rogue 3 signing off.
Bye, guys.
Thanks everyone for joining us to talk about the galaxy far, far away. You can find us on Instagram, Blue Sky, YouTube, and TikTok as Rogue 3 Media. We look forward to talking with you at the next rendezvous point.